How far would you go to find the one person who never asked to be found? For years, 17 companies, billions of dollars moved with a single signature, yet none of it was ever about profit. Every acquisition, every merger, every late-night board meeting had only one silent purpose. Ethan Whitmore was searching for a woman who had disappeared before sunrise without leaving her last name, her phone number, or even a promise to return. The rain poured over downtown Chicago, washing silver reflections across the sidewalk as black SUVs lined up outside the headquarters of Whitmore Holdings. Inside the top-floor boardroom, executives applauded another successful acquisition, but Ethan never looked at the presentation on the massive screen. His attention remained fixed on a thin employee file resting beside his coffee. Claire Bennett, administrative assistant, hired only 3 weeks ago by a struggling marketing firm that had just become the 17th company under his ownership. His fingers tightened around the edge of the folder. 4 years earlier, she had walked into his life completely by accident. 4 years earlier, she had walked away before dawn, leaving behind nothing except a simple silver bracelet engraved with 2 tiny letters, CB. The bracelet had never left his desk. Everyone believed Ethan Whitmore was obsessed with expanding his empire. Financial magazines called him the youngest visionary CEO in America. Investors praised his flawless instincts. Competitors feared the speed of his negotiations. None of them knew the truth. They were never buying businesses. They were buying possibilities. Every human resources database, every employee roster, every forgotten resume became another chance that she might appear again. "Congratulations, Mr. Whitmore," the chairman said proudly. "This acquisition gives us another 1,200 employees." Ethan finally looked up. "Schedule a full employee welcome event tomorrow." The executives exchanged confused glances. Normally, the billionaire never attended orientation sessions. He simply stood, buttoned his navy jacket, and walked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Rain streaked across the glass exactly the way it had that unforgettable night. He could still hear her soft laugh. He could still remember the oversized coat wrapped around her shoulders as she warmed frozen hands around a cup of coffee inside a luxury hotel suite she never meant to enter. She had mistaken him for an exhausted hotel manager. He had mistaken her for someone who wasn't afraid of honesty. For one extraordinary night, neither of them had cared who the other really was. Then morning arrived. She vanished before he opened his eyes. No goodbye, no explanation. Only the bracelet resting beside a handwritten note that read, "Please don't turn me into someone you save." Ethan reached into his pocket and closed his hand around that bracelet once more. Somewhere inside the building below, Claire Bennett was beginning her first day, completely unaware that the man who had spent 4 years searching for her was only a few floors away, and in less than 1 hour, fate was about to make the same impossible mistake twice. Claire Bennett stood outside the glass entrance of Whitmore Holdings with a paper cup of coffee warming her hands, completely unaware that the building towering above her had become her workplace only because of a decision made in a boardroom the previous afternoon. She took one slow breath before stepping through the revolving doors. New jobs always felt the same. New badge, new smile, new promises that people would judge her for her work instead of her past. The polished marble floor reflected rows of bright lights overhead, making everything seem larger than life. Around her, employees chatted excitedly about the merger, wondering whether layoffs would come next. Claire lowered her eyes and quietly joined the line for orientation. She had learned long ago that invisible people survived the longest. 4 years of changing jobs had taught her one lesson above all else. Never stay anywhere long enough for anyone to ask too many questions. Every fresh start carried hope, but hope had become expensive. She remembered the morning she slipped out of that luxury hotel before sunrise. The stranger she had spent the night talking with had listened to every dream. She had been too embarrassed to tell anyone else. She had spoken about wanting a stable life, about escaping employers who treated kindness like weakness, about believing that money changed people. When she noticed the expensive watch resting on the nightstand beside his folded jacket, panic settled into her chest. She realized he belonged to a world she had spent years trying to avoid. So she quietly left behind her silver bracelet and one handwritten sentence asking him not to rescue her. She never expected to think about him again. The conference room doors opened, and the human resources director welcomed everyone with practiced enthusiasm. Smiles filled the room, but Claire noticed something unusual. Fresh flowers decorated every table. Personalized welcome folders waited neatly at every chair. Someone had spent real effort making strangers feel valued. That almost never happened after a corporate takeover. As employees introduced themselves one by one, Claire simply said, "I am Claire Bennett. I worked in customer relations, and I am grateful to be here." She kept her answer short, hoping no one would ask where she had worked before. Then the room suddenly grew quiet. Every head turned toward the entrance. Ethan Whitmore walked inside without security, without assistance, wearing nothing more than a tailored navy suit and a calm expression that immediately commanded the room. The employees stood instinctively. Claire remained focused on the notebook in front of her, unaware of the blue eyes scanning every face until they stopped on hers. Ethan recognized her instantly despite the 4 years that had passed. Her hair was shorter now. Her confidence was carefully hidden beneath professional manners. But it was her. The woman who had unknowingly changed the direction of his entire life was sitting less than 30 feet away, writing today's date across the top of a blank page. His heartbeat, steady through billion-dollar negotiations, suddenly forgot its rhythm. Across the room, Claire finally looked up for the first time, but before her eyes could fully meet his, another employee stepped between them to shake the chief executive officer's hand, delaying the moment fate had been preparing for 4 long years. Claire's eyes lifted almost absent-mindedly, expecting to see another executive delivering another polished welcome speech. But the moment they settled on Ethan Whitmore, something inside her froze. There was no logical reason for it. The man standing confidently at the front of the room wore an impeccably tailored suit instead of the simple sweater she remembered. His hair was styled differently. His posture carried the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to leading thousands of people. Yet his eyes had not changed. They were the same calm blue eyes that had watched raindrops race down a hotel window for years earlier while listening to her dreams, as though every word mattered. Claire quickly looked away, convincing herself it was impossible. Chicago was a city of millions. People resembled one another every day. Memories had a way of inventing familiar faces whenever loneliness lingered too long. Ethan, however, knew there was no mistake. Every detail returned with overwhelming clarity. The way she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear whenever she felt nervous. The tiny scar near her wrist where the silver bracelet had once rested. Even the careful way she held her pen, as though afraid of taking up too much space in the world. 4 years of searching had led to this ordinary conference room filled with folding chairs and complimentary coffee. He had imagined this moment countless times, but nothing prepared him for how fragile it actually felt. One careless sentence could send her running again. He thanked the employees for staying through the transition and spoke about opportunity, respect, and building a company where every person mattered. Most people heard a chief executive officer welcoming his newest team. Claire heard something stranger. His voice carried the same warmth she remembered from the man who had shared stale hotel cookies and terrible instant coffee while making her laugh until sunrise. She tightened her grip on the notebook. It could not be him. The man she met had claimed he worked in operations. He had never mentioned private jets, billion-dollar companies, or magazine covers. When the meeting ended, employees formed a line to introduce themselves personally. Claire deliberately waited until the crowd became smaller, hoping to leave unnoticed. Before she reached the exit, the human resources director smiled brightly. "Mr. Whitmore enjoys meeting everyone personally. Claire, would you mind staying for just a moment?" Her heartbeat quickened. Ethan watched the room gradually empty until only a handful of people remained. Finally, they stood facing each other with only a polished conference table between them. Neither spoke for several seconds. Claire searched his face for certainty, while Ethan searched hers for forgiveness he had not yet earned. He offered a gentle smile, careful not to overwhelm her. "Welcome to Whitmore Holdings, Ms. Bennett. I hope your first day has been comfortable." His words were perfectly professional, but his eyes revealed emotions no business introduction could hide. Claire forced a polite smile in return. "Thank you, Mr. Whitmore. Everyone has been very kind." She turned slightly, ready to leave, when Ethan noticed something tucked inside the transparent pocket of her notebook. It was an old photograph, faded around the edges by years of careful handling. In the corner of that photograph, barely visible, rested the same silver bracelet that had remained locked inside his desk drawer for 4 long years. And at that moment, Ethan realized she had never truly forgotten that rainy night either. Claire left the conference room with measured steps, but her thoughts refused to slow down. The man's voice echoed in her mind with every step across the polished hallway. It was impossible. The stranger from that rainy night had been kind, humble, almost ordinary. Ethan Whitmore was anything but ordinary. By lunchtime, she convinced herself she had imagined the resemblance. She focused on unpacking the small cardboard box she carried from job to job. Inside were only a notebook, a family photograph, 2 favorite pens, and the faded snapshot she had tucked into the clear pocket of her notebook years ago. It showed nothing remarkable, just a coffee cup beside a rain-covered hotel window, yet the corner of the picture captured the silver bracelet she had worn that night. She never understood why she kept it. Perhaps because it reminded her that genuine conversations still existed in a world that often felt transactional. Across the building, Ethan remained inside his office, staring at the city's skyline without truly seeing it. His assistant entered quietly with the afternoon schedule. "Your interviews with the regional directors begin in 15 minutes. Ethan nodded absent-mindedly before asking a question that surprised even himself. "How is the employee welcome event going?" His assistant smiled. "Very well." The new employees seemed relieved. They were expecting layoffs, but your decision to keep everyone has changed the atmosphere. Ethan simply replied, "Good. That was always the plan." He did not mention that one employee mattered to him more than any quarterly report ever could. Later that afternoon, Claire received an unexpected email asking several new hires to attend a small cross-department workshop on the executive floor. She sighed softly. She disliked attention, but declining on her first day was not an option. The workshop room overlooked Lake Michigan, where sunlight finally broke through the gray clouds left behind by the morning rain. As the session began, participants were asked to introduce themselves and share one professional goal. Claire hesitated before speaking. "I want to work somewhere people are valued before numbers are." The room felt unusually quiet. Several managers exchanged thoughtful glances, but Ethan, listening from the back of the room after quietly entering unnoticed, recognized those words immediately. 4 years ago, she had whispered nearly the same sentence while watching raindrops slide across a hotel window. She had said that companies forgot people because numbers were easier to measure than kindness. Hearing those words again felt less like coincidence and more like destiny patiently returning everything it had borrowed. When the workshop ended, employees slowly gathered their belongings. Claire reached for her notebook, but one page slipped free and drifted gently across the polished floor. Ethan instinctively stepped forward and picked it up before anyone else noticed. It was not a report or meeting note. It was a hand-drawn sketch of a rainy hotel window with 2 coffee cups resting on the ledge beneath it. Claire's face immediately flushed with embarrassment as she reached for the page. "I am sorry. That was just an old drawing." Ethan carefully handed it back, his fingers pausing for only a brief second. His voice remained calm, almost gentle. "Some memories are worth keeping." Claire looked directly into his eyes for the first time that day. In that silent moment, the certainty she had been trying so hard to deny quietly settled into her heart. She had finally found the man she thought she had left behind 4 years earlier, but she still had no idea why fate had placed him back into her life. Claire carried the sketch back to her desk, but her hands refused to stop trembling. She had spent 4 years convincing herself that one extraordinary night belonged in the past, yet every word Ethan spoke made those carefully buried memories feel alive again. She opened her email, determined to lose herself in work, when another message appeared. It was a simple invitation from the executive office requesting her attendance at a small employee feedback luncheon the following afternoon. Only 10 recently hired employees had been selected. She frowned. It seemed unusual for the chief executive officer to personally meet new staff members, but everyone around her reacted with excitement. Claire quietly accepted the invitation while telling herself it was merely another corporate tradition. The next day, sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the executive dining room, replacing the rain that had welcomed her on her first morning. The atmosphere felt warm rather than intimidating. Round tables replaced long conference desks, and fresh flowers sat beside handwritten name cards instead of formal place settings. Ethan entered without making a grand announcement, greeting every employee with the same calm smile. He asked about families, career goals, favorite books, and childhood dreams instead of sales targets or productivity reports. Claire watched from across the room, increasingly confused. This was not the distant billionaire described by every business magazine she had ever seen. This was the same man who had once stayed awake until dawn listening to a stranger speak about ordinary hopes. When Ethan finally reached her table, he paused just long enough for their eyes to meet. "Ms. Bennett, how are you settling in?" he asked gently. Claire answered honestly before she could stop herself. "Better than I expected." Ethan smiled. "I'm glad to hear that. A workplace should feel like an opportunity, not a burden." Those words settled deeply inside her because they echoed the promise she had once wished every employer would make. After lunch, employees were invited to tour several departments before returning to work. As Claire walked through the hallway lined with photographs celebrating the company's history, one framed newspaper article caught her attention. It highlighted Whitmore Holdings' remarkable expansion over the previous 4 years. Beneath the headline was a timeline listing every major acquisition. Her footsteps slowed. The dates looked strangely familiar. She quietly counted them. One acquisition only 3 months after she left the hotel. Another 6 months later. Then another. Then another. Nearly every company matched a place she had worked before moving on. A strange feeling settled into her chest. It was impossible. Companies were bought for profits, technology, market share, or strategy. They were not bought because of one employee who stayed only a few months. She forced herself to keep walking, but the coincidence refused to leave her mind. That evening, after most employees had gone home, Ethan remained alone inside his office. He unlocked the bottom drawer of his desk and carefully removed the small velvet box that had stayed there for 4 years. Inside rested the silver bracelet engraved with the tiny initials CB. He traced the letters with his thumb before quietly whispering to the empty room, "I kept my promise. I never tried to save you. I only tried to make sure the world treated you better." At that exact moment, just outside his partially open office door, Claire had returned to retrieve the notebook she accidentally left behind, and every word reached her ears with perfect clarity. Claire stood frozen outside the partially open office door, her notebook forgotten in her hand. She had returned only because she thought she left behind a folder. Instead, she had overheard a confession that made her heart race. She quietly stepped away before Ethan could notice her, but his words refused to leave her mind. "I never tried to save you. I only tried to make sure the world treated you better." She repeated the sentence over and over as she rode the elevator down to the parking garage. Nothing about it made sense. Why would one of the most powerful men in America keep a bracelet she had abandoned for years ago? Why would he remember a woman whose last name he had never known? That night, sleep never came. Claire opened her laptop and began searching through public records, old news articles, and business journals. One by one, the companies appeared on her screen. The small insurance office where she worked for 3 months. The publishing agency that closed shortly after she resigned. The customer service firm she left because her supervisor humiliated employees in front of clients. Every one of them had eventually become part of Whitmore Holdings. At first, she tried to dismiss it as coincidence, but the pattern became impossible to ignore. Each acquisition happened only weeks or months after she left. She leaned back in her chair, overwhelmed by a question she was almost afraid to ask. Had Ethan really spent 4 years following the trail she unknowingly left behind? The next morning, she arrived at work earlier than usual. The office was nearly empty, and the quiet gave her too much time to think. She passed co-workers laughing over coffee, completely unaware that her ordinary first week had suddenly become the center of an extraordinary mystery. Around 10 o'clock, she received another message from the executive office. Mr. Whitmore requested a brief meeting regarding employee development. Her pulse quickened. This time she did not believe it was simply business. Ethan was already standing by the window when she entered his office. The skyline stretched behind him beneath a bright blue sky, but neither of them noticed the view. He offered her a seat, yet she remained standing. "Did you know it was me from the first moment?" she asked quietly. Ethan did not answer immediately. He reached into his desk drawer and placed the small velvet box on the table between them. Claire stared at it without moving. Slowly, he opened the lid. The silver bracelet rested exactly as she remembered it, polished with care despite the passing years. Tears gathered in her eyes before she could stop them. "You kept it," she whispered. Ethan nodded. "It was the only proof that the best night of my life actually happened." Claire finally looked directly at him. "Why, Ethan?" Her voice trembled with equal parts confusion and disbelief. "Why did every company I worked for somehow become yours?" Ethan took a slow breath, knowing there was no longer any reason to hide the truth. "Because every time I arrived too late, you had already moved on. I could never find you, Claire. All I could find were the places that failed to see your worth. I could not buy back the years we lost, but I could make sure no one after you would have to endure what you did." Claire felt the room fall completely silent. For 4 years, she believed she had disappeared without leaving a trace. Only now did she realize someone had quietly followed every invisible footprint she had ever left behind. Claire stared at the bracelet resting between them, but instead of reaching for it, she slowly stepped back. The tears in her eyes disappeared, replaced by quiet disappointment. Ethan immediately noticed the change in her expression. "Claire," he said softly, "please let me explain everything." She shook her head. "You already did." Her voice remained calm, yet every word carried the weight of 4 lonely years. "You did not find me, Ethan. You bought every road I tried to escape through." The sentence settled over the room like heavy rain. Ethan lowered his eyes for the first time since she had entered his office. He had imagined anger, confusion, even disbelief, but hearing the truth from her lips hurt far more than he expected. Claire folded her arms, searching his face for the man she remembered. "Do you know why I left before sunrise?" she asked quietly. Ethan answered with complete honesty. "Because you realized I was not the man you thought I was." She nodded slowly. "Partly. I grew up watching powerful people solve every problem with money. My father lost his small business because someone wealthier decided it was easier to buy everything than to compete fairly. My mother worked herself exhausted for companies that never even learned her name. That night, when I saw your watch and realized who you really were, I became afraid." Ethan listened without interrupting. "Afraid that if I stayed," Claire continued, "my life would stop belonging to me. I wanted someone to choose me, not rescue me. I wanted to build my future with my own hands." She looked directly into his eyes. "Can you understand why discovering this hurts?" Ethan took a slow breath before answering. "Yes." It was a simple word, but it carried no defense, no excuses, and no attempt to justify what he had done. "Every acquisition looked like strategy to the world," Claire whispered. "Now I cannot stop wondering if every promotion I earned, every opportunity one believed I deserved, was actually created by you." Ethan immediately shook his head. "Never. I never told anyone to hire you. I never asked anyone to promote you. I never even spoke your name. I only changed companies after you had already left because I wanted the people who came after you to experience something better than you did." Claire closed her eyes, trying to separate gratitude from heartbreak. His intentions were kind, but kindness could still leave scars. "You should have searched for me," she said quietly. "Not my employers." Ethan's expression softened. "I did search for you. Every private investigator found nothing because you changed apartments, phone numbers, and jobs so often. The companies were the only footprints you left behind." Silence filled the office once again. Claire finally picked up the bracelet, holding it carefully in her palm. It felt exactly the same as it had 4 years earlier, yet everything else had changed. She placed it back inside the velvet box and gently pushed it across the desk toward Ethan. "Keep it a little longer," she said, "because right now, I do not know whether it represents the happiest memory of my life or the biggest mistake I ever made." Without waiting for an answer, she quietly walked toward the door. Ethan remained exactly where he stood, watching it close behind her. For the first time in 4 years, he realized that finding Claire had never been the hardest part. Earning back the trust of the woman he had never stopped loving would require something money had never been able to buy. The following morning, Whitmore Holdings felt different. Rumors traveled faster than elevators, and employees quietly whispered that the chief executive officer had canceled every investor meeting for the rest of the week. No one knew why. Claire arrived determined to keep her distance. She buried herself in reports, answered customer emails, and avoided the executive floor completely. She told herself that returning to an ordinary routine would silence the emotions she could no longer control. Shortly after noon, Every employee received an invitation to gather in the central auditorium for a company-wide announcement. Claire almost ignored it, but attendance was required. Hundreds of employees filled the room as conversations echoed beneath the high ceiling. When Ethan stepped onto the stage, there were no flashy presentations and no financial charts behind him. Only a simple photograph appeared on the large screen. It showed a pair of worn work shoes beside a polished pair of dress shoes. The room became completely silent. Ethan looked across the audience before speaking. Success should never be measured by how many companies we own. It should be measured by how many lives become better because we own them. His voice was calm, but every word carried unusual sincerity. For too many years, I believed I could solve problems from the top floor of a building. I was wrong. Real leadership begins by listening. Claire lowered her eyes, realizing those words were not written for shareholders. They were written for her. Ethan continued. Beginning today, Whitmore Holdings will launch a new initiative called the Open Door Project. Every employee, regardless of position, will have direct access to report unfair treatment, workplace abuse, or unethical management without fear of retaliation. Independent oversight will replace executive approval. Every complaint will be reviewed. Every voice will matter. The audience responded with surprised applause, but Ethan was not finished. The project will not report to me, he said. Power should never investigate itself. A second slide appeared behind him. Claire looked up and froze. The screen displayed her name. Claire Bennett, Director of Employee Advocacy. The auditorium erupted into confused whispers. Claire immediately stood, her face filled with disbelief. Ethan met her eyes, but never asked her to come forward. The position is yours only if you freely choose it, he said. There is no contract waiting for your signature today. No deadline. No pressure. If you refuse, the program will still exist, and someone else will lead it. This decision belongs entirely to you. Claire felt every eye in the room turn toward her, yet for the first time she did not feel trapped. Ethan had done the one thing she believed he never could. He had given away control. He was no longer asking her to trust his money or his influence. He was trusting her with his company. After the meeting ended, employees surrounded Claire with congratulations, assuming she had known in advance. She quietly slipped away before anyone could ask questions. As she reached the lobby, she noticed a familiar velvet box resting alone on the reception desk beside a handwritten note. She slowly opened it. The silver bracelet was gone. Inside rested only a folded piece of paper. With trembling hands, she unfolded it and read a single sentence written in Ethan's careful handwriting. The bracelet belongs with you whenever you decide the memory belongs to you again. Claire held the note against her heart as tears quietly filled her eyes, realizing that for the first time since that rainy night 4 years ago, Ethan had stopped chasing her and finally given her the freedom to choose her own path. 3 days passed before Claire made her decision. During that time, she never saw Ethan outside of company meetings, and he never sent another message. The silence surprised her more than any grand gesture ever could. He had truly stepped back. On Friday evening, after most employees had gone home, Claire took the elevator to the top floor, carrying nothing except the velvet box and the folded note. Ethan was standing by the same window where they had spoken days earlier, watching the lights of Chicago slowly come alive beneath the evening sky. He turned as the office door opened, but said nothing. Claire walked toward his desk and gently placed the box between them. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, she smiled with quiet honesty. You were right about one thing. Ethan waited patiently. The memory does belong to me. She slowly opened the box. Resting inside was the silver bracelet, exactly where she had placed it before leaving the reception desk. Claire picked it up, fastening it around her wrist for the first time in 4 years. Ethan's eyes filled with relief, but he remained exactly where he stood. I am not here because you are a billionaire, Claire continued. I am here because, for the first time since we met, you stopped trying to change my path and trusted me to choose it myself. Ethan nodded gently. I finally understood that loving someone means walking beside them, not building the road beneath their feet. Claire laughed softly, the same warm laugh that had filled a rainy hotel suite years earlier. It took you 4 years to figure that out. Ethan smiled. I have never claimed to be a fast learner. The distance between them suddenly felt much smaller than the 4 years they had spent apart. A week later, Claire officially accepted the role of Director of Employee Advocacy, not as a favor from Ethan, but after presenting her own vision to the independent board, which approved every recommendation unanimously. Within months, the Open Door Project transformed workplaces across Whitmore Holdings. Employee turnover dropped. Satisfaction reached record levels. Managers were trained to lead with respect instead of fear. The program became a model that other companies across the country began adopting. One rainy evening almost a year later, Ethan invited Claire to the same luxury hotel where fate had first introduced them. They sat beside the same rain-covered window with 2 cups of coffee resting between them. Nothing felt expensive. Nothing felt complicated. It simply felt like coming home. Ethan reached into his pocket, and Claire laughed before he even opened the small box. "Please tell me you are not trying to solve another problem with jewelry." Ethan chuckled. "No. This time I am asking a question." He knelt beside her chair with a quiet confidence that came not from wealth, but from humility. "Claire Bennett, for years ago you left before sunrise because you wanted your future to belong to you. Today I am asking if you would choose to let me be part of that future." Tears filled her eyes as she looked at the bracelet already resting on her wrist beside the simple engagement ring he offered. She nodded before she could find the words. "Yes," she whispered, "because now I know you are not asking to rescue me. You are asking to walk with me." Months later, their wedding was held in a quiet lakeside garden surrounded by family, close friends, and employees whose lives had been changed by the values they built together. There were no extravagant speeches about wealth or success. Only one simple promise that both of them repeated while holding hands beneath the evening sky. Love is never about possessing another person's life. It is about giving them every reason to choose yours freely every single day.